Hello and welcome to the show. In the mid-20th century, a conflict started out between Israel and Palestine, which many have described as an ongoing military conflict. Fast forward to 2023, in the month of October, the nations of the world woke up to an announcement of an attack on Israel by a group known as Hamas, which is also part of the Palestine nation in the Gaza Strip. Multiple reactions have come up since then, some for Israel and some against. Yet, there are those who have risen to say there is need for clarity as regards what's going on and why the reactions from both nations are. Newsnight had a conversation with the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Mr. Michael Freeman, and he talks to us about the conflict and what he thinks should and can be done to ensure peace is restored to the region. The ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Your Excellency, Mr. Michael Freeman, thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so we'll go right into it. I know that there's been a lot of conversations around this, the conflict between in the Middle East, because there's a need to clarify and then clarify on some things. Going back, we'll do a bit of a background, as in what exactly are the issues? When did they begin? Because there is a lot of argument. Some say it began these are prehistorical issues. Some say they began from the Torah, the time of the Torah. Some say it's after the times of the prophets. Some say they began after the Civil War, the World War. So in all of these things, let's start off from that point. When did these issues begin? And what are the issues exactly?
Well, I think the issues are very simple. The issues started that the Jewish people have been present in the land of Israel, in this land, for 3,000 years, since the time of the Bible. You know, we all know the stories of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, of Jesus, of all of the different, the Jews that were in the area and the temple. And so the Jews have been there for 3,000 years. And we, in 1948, we reestablished our homeland. And at this point, the conflict is fundamentally between the Israelis and the Palestinians, who both want to have self-determination on the same piece of land. And that's the fundamental overriding conflict. But the specific conflict we're talking about at the moment is a war that Israel didn't want. It's a war that Israel didn't start. Hamas sent thousands of fighters into Israel, and they massacred 1,400 men, women, and children, Israeli civilians, in their homes, in their beds. They kidnapped 200 others, and Israel is acting like any other country would in the world and taking action to make sure that Hamas can never do something like this again.
Okay, so this matter of self-determination, let's go from that point of self-determination where the Israelis and the Palestinians both are seeking self-determination on the same land. There are records, so to speak, of several attempts of putting out a two-state solution to this whole matter. How is it that these attempts have not worked out?
Well, we made offers numerous times, the last being in 2000 at Camp David, where we offered to divide the land, to create a Palestinian state next to an Israeli state, next to a Jewish state. There were even reports that we offered to divide Jerusalem. And instead of the Palestinians coming back with a counteroffer or saying anything, they immediately rejected that offer and decided to launch a murderous campaign within Israel. So, you know, really the question should be to the Palestinians, why have they rejected every offer that Israel has made in the past?
So let me just say here that this conversation that we're having, where we actually did reach out to the Palestinians to come into this conversation. But before now, a colleague of mine had a conversation with the Palestinian ambassador to Nigeria about these matters. Now, the exact issue or the exact conflict that is now the main conversation around the world, the war between Israel and Hamas. Who is Hamas? We do know that we know that Israel is a nation, but who is Hamas?
Right. Hamas is a radical terror organization that was founded with the explicit aim of destroying the state of Israel and killing every Jew around the world. And also, by the way, in December, their leader made it very clear that when they've destroyed Israel and killed all the Jews, they're then going to kill all the Christians in the world. This is a radical extremist terror organization that exists primarily out of the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank, that is aiming to kill all the Jews and destroy Israel.
You called it an organization. The members of Hamas, are they Palestinians or they are from around the world?
No, they're a Palestinian organization based out of the Palestinian areas. We should make clear here, we're talking about one terror organization. This is not about the Palestinians as a whole. It's like if you look at using a homegrown example of Nigeria, nobody would say that Boko Haram is Nigeria. Nigerians are within Boko Haram, but Boko Haram is a terror organization. So the same is true of Hamas. Hamas is a terror organization. Palestinians make up the terror organization. Every Hamas terrorist is a Palestinian, but not every Palestinian is a Hamas terrorist.
So if that be the case, the conflict right now is with the Hamas organization, not with the people of Palestine. Is that what the situation
Absolutely.
is? Okay, so
Absolutely. Our war is with Hamas.
But then the attacks, or so to speak, your response from your nation, Israel, to the recent attacks of Hamas on the Israeli nation have been on Palestinian territories. How do you differentiate where the members of the Hamas organization are and where the people of Palestine are?
In 2007, first of all, a little bit on the history side, in 2005, Israel left all of Gaza, all of our troops, all of our settlers, we withdrew everybody out. And then in 2007, Hamas seized control. So Hamas has been the authority in Gaza since 2007. So Hamas is the authority in Gaza. They are the people who run everything. When you quote the news quotes the Ministry of Health in Gaza, that's Hamas. When you quote any authority within Gaza, that's Hamas. So we are in a very difficult position. We need to destroy Hamas and destroy their infrastructure, kill their fighters, and return our hostages. And in order to do that, sometimes, in a war, unfortunately, civilians are caught up in that war. And we will do everything we can to avoid civilian casualties. The civilian population of Hamas are not our enemies. We will do what we can to avoid the death. But unfortunately, civilians will be killed like they are in any war.
So is there no possibility of avoiding these killings of civilians?
Well, if Hamas were to unconditionally surrender tomorrow and were to return all of the hostages that they've taken, this would end tomorrow morning. Hamas can end this if they want to, but you have to understand, Hamas doesn't actually care about its own population. Hamas keeps its own people under prisoner. Only last week we saw the United Nations said that Hamas had stolen thousands of liters of fuel and food that was in the United Nations store that was meant to be being given to the people, and Hamas stole it all. Hamas don't care about the Palestinians. They hide behind Palestinian population. They hide behind civilians. They embed themselves inside civilian populations. They do so within schools, within hospitals. So we have to understand who Hamas are and what they do.
If we just step back a little bit here, when you started out talking about the organization, you call them a terror organization. But some other groups do not consider them terror organizations. They consider them a pressure group demanding for the liberation of the Palestinians. And indeed, there are some Palestinians that have come up to say that all their life they have been oppressed by Israel and they just want to be free. There are protests around the world demanding the freedom, so to speak, of Palestine. Is Israel not hearing all of these protests? And is Israel not considering the Palestinians, not the organization per se, but the Palestinians who are demanding for freedom and that they be released from this bondage?
Firstly, let's deal with the issue of Hamas. Hamas is a proscribed terror organization across the world. The Americans, Europe, all prescribe Hamas a terror organization. But even if you don't prescribe them, let's look at what they did. They came into Israel on the 7th of October, and they massacred men, women, and children. And I am going to give some details. I think it's important that people understand who these people are. They shot children in front of their parents. They tied children together and they burnt them alive. They took, in one instance, we know that they raped a number of women, 260 young people at a peace concert. They massacred them all and killed them all in cold blood. We know that they went through the streets with grandmothers, shooting them in the head. We had a group of old pensioners who were about to go on a day trip, waiting at the bus stop, and they shot them all dead. If this isn't terrorism, then what is it? This is not resistance. This is not freedom fighting. This is pure, unadulterated terror. And if you can't condemn this as terrorism, then we have an even bigger problem. You know, if we want to have a better future, you talk about the Palestinians and Israel having a better future and having a future together. There can't be a future where Hamas are involved in that. How can you possibly say we're going to have a better future with an organization that rapes women, that murders children, that burns babies alive, that cuts the heads off babies, that cuts the heads off of people whilst they're there? That's not in any way can be a part of a better future. So Hamas are clearly a terror organization. And I want to sit with the Palestinians, and I want to work with them, and I want to look for a better future for both of us. But Hamas cannot be part of that.
Let's look at what Israel has done. You talked about in 2005 when Israel withdrew all its soldiers, withdrew its troops from Gaza, but Hamas took over leadership of that territory between 2005 and 2007, took over leadership and began to dictate what goes on there. But let's talk about some of the efforts by the Israeli government to build a more peaceful environment in the region between Israel and the Palestinians. Let's talk about that. Tell us a bit about some of the things that have been done.
Well, Israel's offered a number of occasions to have peace conversations and to have peace talks. But the region, as you know, is not only the Palestinians. If we look at the region, Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt. We have a peace treaty with Jordan. We now have a peace agreement with Morocco, with Bahrain, with the United Arab Emirates. There are widely publicized reports in the international press that we were in conversations with Saudi Arabia and other countries around the world. So we have to understand that the rest of the world and the rest of the Middle East understands that we need to live side by side. We can work together and we can make a better future. The issue with the Palestinians is a longer-term one, and I really do hope we'll be able to come to some sort of compromise with them and work out some sort of future. But at this point, we need to fight a war against a ruthless enemy in Hamas, who are like ISIS, who are used ISIS traits and ISIS tactics. You know, Hamas is ISIS.
Again, you've talked about the regions that the other states where you have had peace treaties with, Egypt, Jordan, and the others. But you do also know that they've come out to condemn Israel's response. For instance, an attack on an Orthodox church where civilians were taking refuge. That happened about the 19th of October.
Well, firstly, there was no attack on the church. There was an attack in a building next to the church where Hamas terrorists were hiding and were utilizing as a base. So again, I think we need to be very, very careful when we take Hamas's word for what they say has happened. When they say Israel has done this, I think the whole world saw last week exactly who Hamas are, not only in their terrorism and their evil, but also in their ability to lie. When they immediately said that Israel had bombed a hospital and killed 500 people, and actually whatever happened was, the reality was that what actually happened was it was a Palestinian rocket that fell short, landed on the car park and killed a number of Palestinians. Hamas are not only killing Israeli civilians, they're killing Palestinian civilians. So we need to remember exactly who they are and what they're doing here. And we need to make sure that anything they say, we treat not with a pinch of salt, with a bucket of salt. They lie.
So are you saying that Israel has not lied in all of this?
I'm saying to you, we have not lied. I'm saying to you that we will give you the information, whether that information is difficult for us or not. We're a democracy and everything is checked and double checked, and we provide information, but also in their ability to lie. When they immediately said that Israel had bombed a hospital and killed 500 people, and actually whatever happened was, the reality was That what actually happened was it was a Palestinian rocket that fell short, landed on the car park, and killed a number of Palestinians. Hamas are not only killing Israeli civilians, they're killing Palestinian civilians. So we need to remember exactly who they are and what they're doing here. And we need to make sure that anything they say, we treat not with a pinch of salt, with a bucket of salt. They lie.
So are you saying that Israel has not lied in all of this?
I'm saying to you, we have not lied. I'm saying to you that we will give you the information, whether that information is difficult for us or not. We're a democracy and everything is checked and double checked, and we provide information as we have it, always to the truth.
Let's look at some of the things that say within the Israel and Palestinian society, for instance, the conflict generates a wide variety of views and opinions. Now, there are different views to this matter within the Israel and Palestinian communities. Some are for and some are against. How does one sift through the various sides of this conversation to what really is the matter and what the different actions are from the different groups?
So, look, I think that you need to look at a variety of sources. And I think that you need to understand what people are talking about. But I think you also need to be open to understanding to what's happened. You know, there are people out there, the Hamas, for example, are denying that they even killed anybody on October the 7th. We saw the Palestinian ambassador last week said that the 260 young people who were murdered at the Peace Festival weren't murdered. It's all a lie. So, we also have to understand that there are certain facts out there that we have to not deny facts. And then when it comes to opinion, we can look out there. If I say to you that I'm outside now and it's bright sunshine and it's hot and somebody else said it's raining, that's not a difference of opinion. You can go outside yourself and see either it's sunny and it's hot or it's raining. It's not two sides of an argument. One is true, one is a lie. The reality is that 1,400 Israelis were massacred, were murdered, were raped and were burnt alive in Israel on October the 7th. And now Israel is responding, and we're doing what we need to do in order to make sure this doesn't happen again. So I would advise people to at least accept the basic truth. Once you're able to accept the basic truth, to be able to move on. And I think that, as you say, lots of people get caught up in this, and they try and turn this into a Muslim versus a Jewish issue or an Israel versus a Palestinian issue. That's not what this is about. I don't care if you are Christian, if you are Jewish, if you are Muslim, if you are Hindu. Everybody can agree that the murder of babies in cold blood, that the burning of people alive, that the shooting of grandmas, the kidnapping of a Holocaust survivor, all of those things are absolutely clear. And all of those things are absolutely clearly defined and terrible. And that everyone can agree that. It doesn't matter who you are. And then we can have a look at everything else afterwards.
Mr. Freeman, I'm going to ask you a couple of a question here, again, historically. There are conversations in several quarters. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 by the British government. There's a major school of thought that feels that is where this whole matter emanated from. Do you agree with that?
The Jewish people have been in the land of Israel for 3,000 years. We go back to the time of the Bible. It's our homeland. The Jewish people have never, ever had any other homeland in the world. That's where we are. That's where we come from. We are the indigenous people of that land. So, this is whether or not the Balfour Declaration said that the British government, who at that time had the mandate of that land, wanted to see a Jewish state re-established there. Obviously, that was a very significant moment, very welcome moment, very important moment. But that's not what gave the Jewish people the right to their homeland. What gives the Jewish people the right to our homeland is we're the indigenous people there. We have 3,000 years of history from the Bible. Everybody looks at the Bible and reads it. Everybody looks at history and archaeology. You can go to Jerusalem now and you can see that the Jewish people were there. You can see the remnants of the temple. You can see the remnants of where Jesus walked. You can see all of those things proving beyond any doubt whatsoever that the Jewish people were there, that's our homeland, that's where we be. There's been an unbroken Jewish presence within that land since the time of the Bible. So that's where the right of the Jewish people comes from. And all of these other things are markers along the way, but they don't void the very fundamental principle.
So when we talk about fundamental principles here, the Jewish people, as you said, have had 3,000 years. Now, but beyond that, it's always been about survival for the Jewish people and the people of that region, so to speak. Now, but having had major offensives and ceasefires, how has these major offensives against each other, so to speak, affected the survival of the residents of the region?
Look, the Jewish people have been through terrible tragedies, as you know, whether that was the pogroms, whether that was the Holocaust, whether that was various terror attacks, various different things. And one of the reasons this terror attack was so terrible is it's the largest number of Jews that have been killed in a single day since the Holocaust, since the Second World War and the Nazi extermination. And again, we saw the Hamas, this ISIS people, using Nazi techniques of going door to door and slaughtering Jews. So, you know, it's have a very deep psychological effect. It's a very traumatizing effect. You know, we're a very small country. We're under 10 million people in Israel, and everybody knows someone who has either been murdered or has been kidnapped personally. So this is a very personal issue for every Israeli. It's a small country, as I said. And so we're undergoing a trauma at the moment. We are really undergoing a trauma, but we will get through it. We will survive, and we will rebuild Israel in the south of Israel stronger than it's been in the past. And we will make sure that our enemies understand the price there is. If you want to attack Israel, that's the price that there will be. It will be a very, very high price so that people don't do it again and we can look for a better future.
Your Excellency, let me ask this question, but how does Israel intend to distinguish between the all-out war, the conflict with Hamas, and the broader context of the Israel-Palestinian conflict? How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, at this point, the war is between us and Hamas in Gaza, and that's where we're focusing, and that's where we want the focus to stay. We don't want to get involved anywhere else. We don't want to have any conflict with the Palestinians in the West Bank. We don't have a conflict with the Palestinians. You know, we've dropped thousands and thousands, millions of leaflets in the area in Gaza saying that we want you to move out of the area because we're going to be carrying out military operations and we don't want civilians to be harmed. Yesterday, there were trucks of humanitarian aid that came in, of water and food that we want to get to the Palestinian people, because for us, it's important that we do make that distinction between Palestinians, regular Palestinians, and Hamas. Our future is to live side by side with the Palestinian people. It is not to live with Hamas.
So if you say you've dropped leaflets telling Palestinians to move out of Gaza because of the offensive that's going to happen or is already happening, are you implying that your borders are open to receive them into the other parts of the region outside of Gaza? I know that the Israeli border, that conversation is still on about them moving into, I mean, the border with Egypt, about them moving into Egypt.
Well, so the border with Egypt is obviously an Egyptian conversation. It's important, as you say, to point out that Gaza has got two borders, one with Israel and one with Egypt. We are only in control of the border with Israel and not with their border with Egypt. And what the Egyptians do on that border is obviously their decision. And we're in touch with with the authorities in Egypt. But no, we're saying to them to move out of certain areas in Gaza, to move from the north of Gaza down to the south of Gaza, so that the fighting at the Hamas strongholds in the north will be the areas that we can target and we can avoid as much as possible civilian casualties. So we've said civilians move to certain areas because we know when they're in those areas, that those areas will be, we will avoid attacking and avoid doing anything in because the civilians will be there. You know, this is a terrible situation, and we've seen hundreds of thousands of Gazans who've had to leave their homes and move. But we shouldn't also forget that hundreds of thousands of Israelis have had to leave their homes as well. You know, over 300,000 Israelis are no longer in their homes from the north and from the south of Israel because of these terror attacks, because of these rocket attacks. Hamas are sending thousands of rockets across the border. And so many, many, many Israelis are also homeless at the moment, and we're looking after them as a country because that's what we need to do.
Okay, but how does all of this then affect the broader process of peace with the Palestinians that you talked about the fact that Israel wants to live with the Palestinians side by side. Israel wants to ensure that there is harmony between Palestine and the people of Israel. So these conflicts, how does it affect the peace process?
I think that in the short term, it's going to be problematic, but in the long term, it's going to be good. if we can eliminate one of the actors in the region that doesn't want peace, that's only objective as the destruction of Israel and the death of all the Jews around the world, then that's got to be a good thing for peace. How do you make peace with someone who wants you to die and wants your country to disappear? There's no possibility of peace with them. So we need actors on the Palestinian side who are willing and interested to make peace with us, but Hamas have made clear they're not there. So the best hopes for peace are definitely boosted by the removal of Hamas from that picture.
So let's look at that. While the outright war against Hamas goes on in northern Gaza, what processes is the Israeli nation putting in place to ensure peace with the rest of Palestine?
Well, I think at this point it's not a conversation that we're entering into at the moment, because we're in a state of war. And in a state of war, we need to finish the war, and then we need to sit down the day after and see where we move forward and where we can provide a better future for our children and for the future of Palestinian children. We need to see condemnation of what Hamas is. We need to see condemnation of what they've done, so there can be some trust-building exercises that take place. So the day after, we can start those conversations. But at this point, it's about, my country's at war. My country is in a war that we did not want. We're in a war that we did not start, but we're in a war that we need to finish.
We're going to go on a break in a moment, but before we do that, I was going to ask you, you said something earlier about aid that was allowed into the region for the civilians. Is that aid from the Israeli government and its people, or it's from outside of Israel?
From outside of Israel, it's coming in through the Egyptian border.
Okay. Is Israel also planning to send out aid to the people in that region, to the Palestinians there?
We are planning on getting back our hostages. The Palestinians in Gaza Strip are currently holding over 200 Israeli hostages. They've not allowed them to have any access to the Red Cross. We have no information of their state. And these hostages, they include a 9-month-old baby. There are over 30 children being held. There is an 85-year-old Holocaust survivor that's being held. So the conversation needs to be return our hostages. After you've returned our hostages, we can have a conversation about what we will do or won't do.
You also do know that amongst the Palestinians are Jews. Is that a problem or a burden for the Israeli government as well?
Well, the Palestinians, the Jews in Gaza are the ones that the Palestinians are holding, the hostages. They've got 200 hostages that they've kidnapped. They will use them as human shields. They will treat them terribly, we know from past experience. We will do whatever we can to get our hostages back, to bring our people back to Israel. That will be one of our major aims of this war.
Some allegations have been leveled against Israel for a while now. Israel, for one, has been accused of domination and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people for 75 years or thereabout. That's on one side. Plus, Israel accused of operating an open air, what they call, or what has been called, an open air prison, where about 2 million people have been kept in incarceration for over 16 years. Gaza.
So both of those claims are preposterous, and I'll explain why. You only need to look at Palestinian areas to know that there's clearly no ethnic cleansing going on. You can't look at an area and see the population continually growing every single year, growing and growing and growing, and accuse somebody of trying to reduce the numbers. It's nonsensical. It doesn't in any way follow logic. And regarding the second accusation, in 2005, as you know, Israel left Gaza, and there was an airport in Gaza. They asked for an airport. They had an airport. They had a port. They had all of those things. And then Hamas took control in 2007 and started firing rockets, started launching terror attacks, and doing all of those things. And so Israel said, well, we're not going to give you the ability to carry out terror attacks and give you the facilities and all the tools and all the equipment and the guns and the explosives. So we're going to stop you doing that. You can't reverse the cause and effect. The reason that Israel limits what goes into Gaza is because Hamas used those things to shoot us. Before they were firing on us, before they were carrying out terror attacks, everything was allowed in. Since they've started doing that, we've stopped it. And we only saw this weekend. On October the 7th, we saw what happens if you open the border and you let Hamas in. They massacre your people, they murder your children, they burn your your population and they rape your women. And therefore, we couldn't possibly allow Hamas to be coming in and attacking us.
But then let's ask this question. How did Hamas come about? Because there are those who believe that Israel may have inadvertently established Hamas by its own self.
Sorry, so regarding Hamas, Hamas is a terror organization. It receives funding and inspiration from Iran. I've seen all these accusations. Israel did not create Hamas. Hamas is a creation of a radical Islamist terror organization that was created there. Certainly, there have been accusations that of how Israel related and maybe wasn't as strong with Hamas that it could have been. And I'm sure those will be questions that will be asked in the inquiries that will take place after this war is over. What Israel's relationship was with Hamas and what we could have done earlier to avoid it. But that's not really the issue. Okay,
but let me ask this. Are you saying then that Israel did not, in the 80s, for instance, in the 1980s, Palestinians were believed to have started uniting to end what they consider the military occupation of Palestine, but Israel began to covertly fund fringe organizations, and this gave birth to the likes of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, etc. You don't agree that Israel, in one way or the other, helped to form these groups?
We certainly didn't form those groups. Exactly what our relationship was with them and whether or not we could have done more or done less will definitely be one of the questions that will be asked in the inquiry after this as to what the relationship was. But obviously, it's ridiculous to suggest that Israel would be encouraging an organization like Hamas that massacres Israeli civilians.
Okay, so you said that this matter of what has been called occupation, the Israeli occupation of Palestine, is not in any way directed at oppressing the people of Palestine. Is that what you're saying?
No. Look, again, we left in 2005. In Gaza, Israel left every single millimeter of Gaza in 2005. We were told, take out your soldiers, withdraw the settlements, and there'll be an opportunity for peace and for better. So we said, we'll do that. And if this works, we can look to start to see what will happen on the West Bank as well. And look what happened. We got, instead of peace and security, we got thousands of our civilians massacred and murdered.
So towns like Bethlehem, for instance, that is considered a very significant part of the Christian faith for the Christians. Bethlehem is somewhat divided by a huge wall built by Israel. And the people are divided, so much so that families are divided on the two sides of the walls. And this is considered an act of oppression.
Look, again, you're mixing cause and effect. Israel left Bethlehem and handed it over to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority are in total control of Bethlehem. And then in 2000 and 2001, 2002, 2003, suicide bombers came across from Bethlehem and from other places within the West Bank into mainstream Israel. Suicide bombers blowing up buses, blowing up cafes, blowing up cinemas, killing hundreds of Israeli civilians, citizens in there as children going to school. And so Israel put up a barrier across there to stop those suicide bombers coming in. And we should remember that once the barrier went up, 99% of all of those suicide bombings were stopped. So again, we're mixing here cause and effect. The barrier was put up after the suicide bombing. It was a response to the suicide bombing, and it stopped the suicide bombing.
Okay, so what you're saying, Israel's only reacting to the actions of the Palestinians. That's what you're saying?
Absolutely. We are reacting. The instances that you're mentioning are absolutely reactions. Again, in 2000, we offered the Palestinians a state. In 2005, we left Gaza. In 1993, we signed Oslo. All of these things happened, and we got rejectionism in return. We didn't get any moving forward. And therefore, we have to look at this in those contexts. You can't take an item in isolation and say, well, okay, let's start here.
So, but what about the needs or the demands of the Palestinian nation? What about the need for what they consider to be oppression to cease? I mean, they've gone about protests in different ways. There was that March of Return. I mean, in 2018, for instance, they protested, but Israel also reacted to that protest. As in 2018, one of the longest protests that there might have been, don't they have a right to their nation or to their freedom?
Well, in 2018, you talk about the protest, their March of Return, as they called it. That was thousands of people marching towards the border in Gaza, trying to tear down the border and to come into Israel. Well, we saw on Saturday what happens when they tear down the border and come into Israel. They murdered 1,400 of our civilians. They massacred them, they raped them, they burned them alive. That's what happens. And so in those instances, if you want to protest, Israel is a democracy. You may protest as long as those protests aren't violent and you're using the protest there. And this was in the Palestinian areas. If the Palestinians want to protest, then I believe they should protest. They do not have the right to tear down a border fence, because we saw what happens when Hamas tear down a border fence.
In the picture of the broader relationships with the other nations in that region, let's put those nations in this picture of what's going on between Hamas and Israel, this conflict. How would Israel, let me get the right words now, how would Israel, the implications of this conflict, how would it impact on Israel, or how is it impacting, rather, on Israel's relationships with the other nations in the region?
Look, our relationships within the region are very, very important to us. We have peace treaties with many different countries, and as you know, we were in conversations about normalization as well with Saudi Arabia. And Iran, which is the big regional player here, doesn't want peace in the region. They don't want those talks to succeed. So we can see Iran encouraging Hamas and being involved in Hamas to carry out these terror attacks. We can see on our northern border, Hezbollah, which is another Iranian proxy, attacking across the border, trying to cross the border, sending across anti-tank weapons, sending across rockets, all sorts of different things, because Iran is trying to destabilize the region. We've seen what Iran has done to Syria, the mess that Syria is. We've seen what Iran has done in Iraq. We've seen what Iran is doing across the region. And so when we talk about the other countries in the region, you see countries that want progress, that want to move forward, that want to make peace with Israel, that want a development. And then you have Iran, who is doing everything they can in order to destabilize the region and to make sure there isn't a better future and there isn't a peace. And you can see Iranian people rising up against their government. You can see the Iranian people protesting against their oppression. And that's what this is about. This is about forces of oppression and forces of progress. And we need to see, we need to be on the side of progress and not on oppression.
Okay, so we do have a president who's come up to condemn the actions of Hamas. That's President Abbas, has condemned the violence and the actions of Hamas, particularly in the light of the recent attacks. But is Israel considering engaging with President Abbas to eke out or to work out a peace program that can affect both nations?
We want very much to move forward and to have a conversation, and that will be something to consider the day after the war. At this point, there is no conversation to be had at the moment because we're fighting a war, and we need to finish this war with Hamas, and we need to make sure that Hamas can't attack us. And after we've done that, we need to start talking about the day after tomorrow.
But you do know that Israel is very key and is very important to a lot of nations, especially the African nations as well. So what's Israel's reactions to the peace moves and the efforts, diplomatic efforts by the ECOWAS nations and the African Union nations, for instance, to see an end to this conflict?
Anybody who is working to release the hostages, anybody who is making a very clear call to release all of the Israeli hostages, anybody who is calling on Hamas to surrender, anybody who is calling on Hamas to stop their terrorism is a welcome. And we welcome anybody who is going to call to release the hostages and to call for condemn the terrorism and to call for an end to it. And we very much are working with our friends across the world who are making this very, very clear. We've seen countries across the world condemning what Hamas have done and calling for the immediate release of the hostages.
Oh, okay, so let's go back a little bit in history. So you talked about Israel being around for over 3,000 years. You also mentioned that Israel's in there from the time of the Bible. So let's go back a bit into the Bible and the Torah and look at how the two nations, so to speak, the Jewish nation and the Arabic nations or nations came about. These are two children from one father. Now, when the two of these children consider where they're coming from, shouldn't they sit down and have a conversation? And can that come into play in the bid to end the conflict in the Middle East?
Look, I very much hope so. I'm an observant Jew. I have a number of friends who are Muslims and observant Muslims. And one of the most important things is to have those conversations. Those conversations aren't always easy conversations, you know, but you don't get to make peace and you don't get to make decisions with your friends. You get to make them with those people you disagree with. And so, you know, we need to start building it. And I would certainly very much like to see greater dialogue between Jewish people, between Muslims, between Christians, to build some of those common grounds and those common areas that we can then start to have the conversation. You know, we need to understand each other's narrative. You know, the people who are out there who are saying, oh, well, the Israelis weren't killed, the Israelis weren't murdered is obviously preposterous. And we need to make sure that conversation ends and accept each other's suffering, accept each other's problems, and to enter into a dialogue. So I am very much interested in dialogue. I very much welcome the opportunity. And I would certainly be interested and excited to engage anyone in Nigeria on this issue, whether they be Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, or anybody else.
Finally, just before we let you go, we talked earlier about the need to put out the right kind of information. You said we need to go through the different sources, but we all know that in this social media age where the world has become one large community, all manner of information is put out there, and many times it's put out to suit the person who's putting out the information. But there's a need for clarity at all times. So what would you advise be done to ensure that things are put out as clear as they should be for everyone to see and determine their own decision?
So I think that you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's really important, especially in today's world of social media and everyone wanting an instant answer. The first and most important thing is to take a breath, to take a pause and to stop and to see if we can get the information. Not necessarily run to tweet or to get out what it is, but to stop, look, gather all of the information and make an educated guess. As I said, we saw this week. Everybody ran after 2 seconds and said, oh, the hospital's being destroyed. Israel's responsible. When after 3 hours of checking, it turned out the hospital wasn't destroyed. It was the car park. And it wasn't Israel. It was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket that fell down. It wasn't 500 people that were killed. It was way, way less than that. And that was being verified by the Europeans, by the French, by the British, by the Americans, by all of the independent news organizations. But there's a rush to go quickly. So my encouragement will be take a deep breath, verify information, look at the different sources, and then go with truth and look at those people you're getting it from. If the source is Hamas, these are the same people who murdered 1,400 people. These are the same people who butchered women and children. If they're willing to butcher women and children, there's a good chance they're willing to lie to you as well.
Okay, so I know this has just come to mind, and I thought we should also look at it a bit about that matter of finding peace. I came across a video recently, and it's been out in the social media space, where a Muslim was talking about the fact that Palestine or the Palestinians were not mentioned anywhere in the Quran or in the Bible. And you talked about the fact that Israel's been there over 3,000 years. The nations around that region, the Middle East, for instance, the Saudi Arabias of this world, Saudi Arabia is considered one of the strongest nations and the leading Islamic nation. What role do you think that Saudi Arabia should be playing in ensuring that this whole thing is sorted?
Look, I think that any country that wants to see a just peace and wants to see a better future in the Middle East for all of our children should have a significant role. And I think that that's important. And I would welcome all of those people, but we need to make sure it's on the basis of conversations. And I think that what anyone can do is encourage the Palestinians to look for a peaceful solution, because ultimately, not Saudi Arabia, not any other country in the world will be able to make a peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The only people who can do that are the Israelis and the Palestinians, and we need to sit with each other and work out something that works from there. What the other countries in the world can do is encourage compromise, encourage reasonableness, and encourage us to talk, and then to make sure they provide afterwards the guarantees to keep it long-lasting so that we can have a better future for all of our children.
You talked about finding a lasting solution. There's this report that, and you talked about it too, several times the Palestinian nation has been offered a two-state system. Could you walk us through that process? Someone said there are about 5, some said there are 6 attempts at creating a two-state system in that region, but the Palestinians continuously rejected this. Why do you think, what's the reason for that rejection, those 5 or 6 times that this offer was made by Israel?
So I think you need to ask them, but the messaging that they've said so far is that they unfortunately don't believe that the Jews have a right to an independent country. They'll say they recognize Israel, but they don't recognize Israel as a Jewish country. They don't recognize 3,000 years of Jewish history. If you talk to a Palestinian representative and you ask them, they'll tell you the Jews have no history in Jerusalem. They'll tell you that the Jews have no right to be there, that they are colonialists, that they are people who've come from everywhere else. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is that the Palestinian leadership needs to say in a loud and clear voice that the Jewish people have a history, the Jewish people have a right to be there, and that we have we have the right to live in that land. And once we do that and they make that statement, I think that peace will come very quickly afterwards.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Freeman. Mr. Michael Freeman is the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria. Thank you for speaking to us today. We do hope that this conflict will be resolved as quickly as possible and peace can return to the Middle East. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed.
And that's our show for today. I want to thank you for letting us be a part of your day. Please note that we also reached out to the spokesperson of the organization called Hamas to speak with us, Mr. Ghazi Hamad. We reached out to him, but eventually he was unable to come onto the conversation. Hopefully he'll be able to come on soon and we'll get his own side of the conversation. Thank you for letting us be a part of your evening again. I would like to encourage you to get in touch with us. Let's know what you think. Let's get your part of the conversation. Our social media handles are on your screen. Also, you can watch this program and previous episodes of the program via our podcast. Just go to our website, channelstv.com/podcast to get started. Till we come your way again, I'm Neo Taigbe. Bye-bye.